Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Taryn Southern and it's really great to be back here for our regular Q&A session with the man who has spent a lifetime asking big questions and making us all feel just a little bit guilty for not reading more science books. It's great to see you, Richard.
Very nice to be here.
Well, so you know how this works. We basically sift through all the comments that we get on your videos and social media, and we pick out some of our favorites. So I'm just going to jump right in with one from Instagram. And this is from O. Ren. And he asks, if there are multiple universes, how come this one feels so real?
Well, it would do, wouldn't it? Because we're in the universe that we're in. So, of course, it would feel real. I think most of the others on the multiverse theory, most of the others would not be hospitable to us at all. We couldn't live there. We're on the multiverse theory, we are in one of the tiny minority of universes which is suitable to us. And that's why it feels reasonably hospitable. At least this Earth does. Most of the universe is very inhospitable to us, of course. That's why it feels so real, because we live in it. Isn't that a good enough reason? I mean, our eyes and our ears are made to live in it and sense it.
That's right. The senses. So, okay, I love that answer. Let's move on to another question from YouTube from Simpleton. He asks, if you started your career today, what area of evolutionary biology or science more broadly would you want to study or investigate?
Well, what's happened more recently is since the 1950s is the molecular genetics revolution. I grew up with that. And I suppose now it's going so fast that would be an exciting area to be in if I was a biologist. If I wasn't going to be a biologist, I might be a computer scientist. I think that's fascinating.
Now, of course, AI might be taking over some of those jobs.
Well, yes, and that's a very interesting topic in its own right.
Sure. Okay, another question from your YouTube. What was your last epiphany moment? And if you can't remember, any sort of notable lifelong epiphany moment in your work?
Well, going back quite a long way, I suppose it would be the extended phenotype, which was actually, way back. The Genetic Book of the Dead, I suppose, my most recent book. That's a kind of minor epiphany.
And what would you say made that a minor epiphany?
Well, the idea that in principle you can look at an animal, look at its genes, look at its body, look at its physiology, and read the animal as a book, which describes the environments in which its ancestors lived and were naturally selected. In principle, that ought to be true because the animal is shaped by the filtering process of natural selection on its ancestors. The obvious examples are highly camouflaged animals, which almost literally have their environment or their ancestral environment painted on their back. But I think that process goes right through every detail of the interior of the animal, and that's the message of the Genetic Book of the Dead.
Mm-hmm. So true. Okay, from another question, Hellier COH, is intelligence correlated with the way we visualize things in our head?
I am not a psychologist or a neurophysiologist. I don't know the answer to that. It would not surprise me if that were true. Intelligence is a difficult thing to measure, and it is a multidimensional thing composed of lots of different aspects. And some of them are probably the ability to model the world, model what comes in through the senses in your head in a constructive way. So I would think that probably yes. The answer is probably yes, but I don't know any data on it.
Sure. I like that as a reflection.
Yes.
Okay, from Fried Cheese Macaroni Ball. The question is, do you think we are still missing a fundamental component of evolution similar to how Darwin lacked genetics?
I'm not sure about that. I think probably not a big one. We don't understand certain things like the origin of life, and we don't understand what consciousness is all about. But I think that's a bit different from Darwin's lack of understanding of genetics. Darwin got genetics completely wrong. I doubt if we've got anything wrong in that major sense, but it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you've ever had, I suppose, a large question mark around that you feel if we had better tools, more advanced technologies, that you would be able to probe that question better?
Well, the origin of life is, I'm not sure that would succumb to better tools because it happened so long ago that we can't actually get at it. I think that would succumb to possibly better theoretical tools, better modeling, theoretical modeling. And consciousness is more of a philosophical problem. And sure. I'm not even sure what an answer to that might look like. I know what an answer to the origin of life riddle might look like. I just don't know what the answer is, but I know the kind of thing it would have to be. In the case of consciousness, I'm not even sure what the question is. I just find it deeply mysterious.
Sure. I have been enjoying your more recent explorations with artificial intelligence.
Oh, right.
And I'm curious, as you've been playing and experimenting, do you feel optimistic about the possibility of these technologies as they get, bigger and more robust, being able to better answer some of these questions?
I've been hugely impressed. I must say, I've been playing with one of them, ChatGPT, and I questioned it. I had one long conversation asking it whether it was conscious, and it said it wasn't. And I had a long conversation about what that meant. And it's very hard to believe it's not conscious. I feel when I ask it, in a later time, I asked it to write a sonnet about evolution. And I think I asked it to write, I asked it to write 3 sonnets, and I didn't want to, the 3 were quite different, and it just produced them instantly. And I said, I can't ask it. It must be getting bored. I sort of feel that there's a person in there that I don't want to bore. I had to pinch myself and persuade myself that it's not a person. And I asked it to make up jokes, and they were pretty bad jokes, but at least they were. It made the effort. And once again, I asked it to do about 6 jokes, and then I couldn't bear to try its patience by asking it any more.
I love that. In a sense, the tendency to anthropomorph, but I can't say that word.
Yes, you can't help it. I think. We all do it, even with our computers. We say things like the computer thinks so and so, but with these AI programs, they are uncanny. They really are. The one way you can tell that it's not a person is that it's too quick. It produces the answer instantly. And that, of course, would be very, very easy to just simply slow it down to make it seem more human.
Sure. Yeah, I think actually watching some of your evolution of using these tools too. Remember how last summer I came by and played you a song that I wrote with ChatGPT, and we also did a little bit of training. And you were intrigued, but very clear that it was not up to par, that it couldn't yet match your voice. Have you found any sort of more insights there in your experiment?
Somebody sent me a simulation of my voice, which was not too bad. It was recognizably not me. It sounded a bit too nasal, I think, but it was certainly getting there.
Yeah, it's wild. Well, on that note, we will, I'm sure, learn a lot about these questions and about consciousness as we continue exploring with these tools. Okay, we're going to go back to our questions now. So from Instagram, this is from Ipsita6632023, asking, is it true the rate of development disorders and other disabilities in children are increasing currently, or was it there before and now diagnosis and awareness is just better? What could be the reason?
I know nothing about that. I'm sorry.
That's fine. We'll go ahead and move to the next one. From Lauren KH, we have, Dear Richard, in your opinion, what is the most compelling theory of how our universe came to be?
I would like to know more physics. I It is a question in physics, question in cosmology, and I can only go by what I read as an amateur. So I am strictly an amateur where physics is concerned. Physicists tell me that a random quantum event is capable of bringing the Big Bang into existence, and everything followed from that. I have an intuitive conviction that the origin of everything has to be simple. It cannot be complex, because if it's complex, then that simply doesn't explain anything. Complexity needs an explanation, a special kind of explanation, which is what Darwin provided. So whatever the origin of the universe was, it has to come from primeval simplicity. But exactly how it happened, that's a question for physicists, and I think physicists themselves can't really answer that yet, and I certainly can't as a biologist.
Sure. All right, great. Thank you. From YouTube, Osibite asks, I believe you once said that alien life may be real. What do you base this assumption on, and how do you imagine that alien life would look and or manifest itself?
It's a statistical argument. The sheer number of planets that are in the universe, we now know, actually, because of astronomical observations, is simply colossal. I think the last count I read was 10 to the 22 stars, and most of those will have planets. And so the number of possible opportunities for life to arise is staggeringly large. And if you want to believe that it only arose once, then that has to be here, because here we are. And that would have to mean that the origin of life on this planet was a stupefyingly rare, improbable event, which I don't believe. So I think it's highly likely that there is plenty of life in the universe. There's probably a bigger barrier to intelligent life than there is to life itself. I'm guessing that. So it may be that there's quite a lot of life at what you might call the bacterial level, and perhaps rather few instances of life at the intelligence level, and perhaps fewer still at the level where we might hope to detect it. That would have to mean that the alien life had a technology capable of broadcasting extremely powerful signals, presumably radio signals, that we could pick up. And I think the enterprise called SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence using radio telescopes, is a very worthwhile enterprise, worth spending money on. And I hope to live long enough to experience it when it comes. The second part of the question was, what do I think it might be like? Well, science fiction authors struggle to think of bizarre strangeness in alien life, and that, of course, is a very good thing to do. We cannot expect it to be the same as ours. On the other hand, if a planet had the same gravity as ours and was roughly the same distance from its star as we are from the sun, then and you might expect that actually it could be quite similar to ours. I mean, there are only so many ways of seeing, for example, and so we'd expect that eyes would evolve which would look like one of the 9 or so different designs of eye that we see in the animal kingdom on this planet. Similarly, ears, similarly, means of getting about, legs or wheels. I think it might not be that different from what we're familiar with, but on the other hand, if the gravity was different, if, say, the planet had gravity as strong as Jupiter's, then the design of the creatures would be very, very different. I mean, you would have animals the size of a mouse having the build of a rhinoceros, or animals the size of on the other kind of planet where the gravity is very, very slight, very weak. You might have animals the size of a rhinoceros with the build of a spider. So you have to take into account things like gravity, things like the atmosphere, things like how much light there is. And then I think you can make a reasonable guess as to what it might look like.
I just had this idea of you releasing some sort of children's book, Richard Dawkins' Machinations of Alien Life, and using AI to create these alien life forms.
Yes. Well, of course, I mean, there are a whole lot of other questions about what the genetics would be like. There would have to be some kind of genetics. And I think it's pretty clear it would have to be digital. Analog genetics is too error-prone. I think it would be Darwinian life. I've published on that, and I think there's very good reason to think that if there is life, and I'm pretty sure there is, if there is life, then it will be Darwinian. That means there has to be genetics. It has to be high-fidelity genetics, which means it has to be digital. It almost certainly would not be DNA, because that would be too much of a coincidence. Well, certainly it would be too much of a coincidence if it had the same genetic code as we have. I think it's highly likely to be carbon-based. Carbon is unique among elements in having the property of making these huge macromolecules, which life seems to depend upon. Further, I suspect that it would have to be protein-based, because proteins are so immensely versatile and powerful in their catalytic properties. So I would predict that it would be carbon-based, protein-based, with a digital genetics, probably not DNA, and Darwinian. And then as for the gross anatomy and things like whether they can see and walk and fly, then I think that would depend on things like the gravity and the atmosphere and the proximity of the star.
I think this is so fun. I think this is such a fun idea for you to bring to life in some way. It really stokes the imagination while also getting to explore like all of these sort of preferences, I suppose, or I don't know how you would describe it, that other life might have in terms of the form that it takes. Very interesting. All right. Not to give you any more projects to work on. You're busy enough.
Yes.
Okay, so this question is from Vamosa BV, and the question is, any new explanations or hypothesis for how consciousness evolved?
No.
Which is a big question. Big.
No, that's I don't think really anybody in the world has any very persuasive ideas on that. So I certainly don't.
Okay, we will pass that along to all of the others. Okay, next up from Nip Pondering, also on YouTube. We know viruses have been with the animal kingdom for a long time, and that some have been known to be transmissible to other species. If we had a time machine and traveled back to Australopithecus, what threat level do you think we would face from viruses from our genetic past?
Yes, that's interesting. I suppose it's probably right to say that what such viruses as they had, we would not have developed any immunity to, and it would be rather analogous to the situation when the Spaniards first invaded South America and brought diseases which were lethal to the Native Americans there. But the Spaniards over many centuries had acquired immunity, had evolved immunity to it. So I would think the same would probably be true of the sort of viruses which infected Australopithecus. It's a good point.
That makes sense. Another question from Facebook from Endymion248. When I contemplate human inventions, from nuclear fusion to mirroring the processes within stars, to hydraulic systems mimicking our circulatory system and internal organs, and even artificial intelligence, which is a faster version of our brains, it appears we are constantly drawing inspiration from the natural world. Do you believe we have ever truly invented something entirely new, or will we always be limited to adaptation and improvement?
That's a fascinating question. Let me think. Well, we did invent echolocation before we discovered that bats do it. So it's true that we could have got the inspiration from bats, but actually we didn't. Yeah, I mean, well, of course, we have radio, and no animal has radio. No animal uses radio waves, and we use radio waves enormously. I mean, we're using them all the time: television, communication, telephones. So the whole electronics using radio waves is entirely a human invention, and has nothing to do with the animal kingdom. So that, I suppose, is the big one. Well, that'll do for now, anyway.
That's great. I love that explanation.
Well, the wheel too. I mean, we depend upon wheels to an enormous extent, and no animal does. The nearest approach to a wheel is the spinning axle of the bacterial flagellum. But again, that was discovered long after we were using wheels.
Now, I don't know if our friend Indy Mayan would consider the wheel as a reflection of something in the natural world, like our iris, or getting sort of inspiration from.
Yes, that's a good point. I doubt. I don't think that can be the case. I suspect it's more kind of rolling logs, and then thinking of how to harness that.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, from a question on Facebook, Max Middleton wants to know, how much do we understand about the mechanisms that allow animals to be born with inherent knowledge? How does it vary between species? And how does that knowledge base evolve? Humans are born with almost no knowledge except the urge to suckle, but are primed to learn. A spider knows how to weave a complex web immediately, but maybe never actually learns anything.
Yes, well, the word instinct is used for knowledge. It's not normally called knowledge, but anyway, behavior patterns that sort of go off like clockwork without any prior experience. And this is extremely common and can be quite elaborate. It varies from species to species in fascinating ways. I mean, each species of bird builds a nest in a particular way and knows how to do it instinctively. In many cases, the song or the signaling system, whatever it is, of the animal is built in instinctively. Spider webs, as the questioner says. The great majority of animals behave in ways that are laid down by genetic programming of brains, obviously, and it's the brain that actually does it. But the way the brain is wired up is done by natural selection working on genes for brain anatomy. And it's a fascinating subject. There's much studied by the people called ethologists, the students of the evolution of animal behavior.
Fascinating. So these instincts are hardwired, and then you'd say the learned behavior
yes,
is sort of like
I mean, they are hardwired. I mean, they develop in the individual in a way that you wouldn't necessarily call hardwired. And for example, the song of many species of bird appears to be instinctive in that it develops in birds that have been isolated and never heard another bird sing. On the other hand, they teach themselves to sing by practicing. So the knowledge of what the song ought to sound like is built into the auditory part of the brain, and it gets transferred to the motor part of the brain, the executive part of the brain, by practice. So the bird burbles away at random, and every time it hears a bit of burble which sounds right to it, according to the built-in template of what the song ought to sound like, it repeats it. And so it learns to sing by trial and error against a built-in template or model of what the song ought to sound like. So although we say it's hardwired in a funny way. It's hardwired on the sensory side of the brain and then transferred to the motor side by learning.
That is so wild. Now, over time, extensive periods of time in evolution, is there a preference for more of these kinds of skills to become hardwired as time goes on?
Well, the thing is, I suppose that the details of exactly the right way to behave are so complicated that to build it in genetically might be less economical than to give the animal a rule for repeating anything that feels good. So whereas some things are hardwired, other things are best left to the animal to learn later, perhaps also because the environment changes, and so it's not possible for the genes, so to speak, to predict exactly what the environment is going to be like.
That makes total sense, and also analogous to a lot of the theories around training AI systems as well.
Is that right?
Today,
Okay.
Yes, with how to train them with rule-based neural networks and sort of where you're going to get the most accurate answer.
Yes, of course.
How it's changing.
Yes.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, great. Moving on to, we just have a few more questions left. From Sonia on Facebook. Dear Professor, how and when and why have organisms developed survival instinct?
How and when and why, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Gosh.
Yes.
Well, when is ever since life began, all the time, because those genes which cause the animal to behave in such a way as to survive, those genes survive, and so they get passed on, and that's the how of it. The why of it is, well, there's no why in the sense of a long-term purpose, but the why is, with hindsight, any animal that does behave in a way that fosters its own survival does survive, obviously, and passes on its genes, obviously, and so its offspring inherit the whatever it takes to survive. So I suppose that's the why of it. But that's really just a question about the whole of evolution. That's what it's all about. That's what natural selection, Darwinian natural selection, is all about. The how, the why, and the where, and the when.
Yes. It's basically a question that says, tell us all of your work, Richard, and encapsulate it in a very short period of time. Okay, great. Moving on to a question from Narman B. Zaid. Dear Professor Dawkins, do animals, and this is a little bit lengthy, so I'm going to he'll give some examples of what he's referring to. Do animals possess a conceptual understanding of death? And if so, to what extent? For example, certain species exhibit thanatosis, a survival strategy where they mimic death, often including behaviors like immobility and emitting odors reminiscent of decay. Does this behavior suggest that these animals have any observational understanding of death as a state characterized by immobility and specific sensory cues? Or could this imply this?
I think that feigning death is not evidence for conceptual understanding of death, any more than a spider has a conceptual understanding of what a web is for, or what it's like. A spider just does its job by clockwork, built into the brain by the genes. And similarly, the feigning death would be something like that. It's just simply the animal has a clockwork mechanism which says it doesn't say feign death, it says lie on your back and just look dead. It doesn't think of it as looking dead. It simply does the action by clockwork. There are fascinating examples of instincts where the animal has no clue why it does it. I mean, the broken wing display, for example, in many birds, independently evolved in many different species of bird, when their nest is threatened by a ground predator like a fox, they will pretend to have a broken wing. This is not feigning death; it is feigning severe injury, and so the bird kind of limps along with a wing kind of dangling like that, pretending to have a broken wing. The fox is lured to follow this bird, and then at the last minute it takes off, having lured the fox away from the nest. It has no idea why it does it. It doesn't think of itself, I think I better pretend to have a broken wing. It's just that natural selection has built into the brain the mechanical, automatic, clockwork behavior pattern, which we can see is effective because it feigns a broken wing. The same would be true of feigning death. Now, as for having a concept of death, it has been said that elephants have been observed to do something that looks a bit like mourning for their dead comrades, and to going to the skeleton of a dead elephant and paying a sort of attention to it, which looks like the sort of thing that one might do if one was paying one's respects at a grave. And that's, of course, anecdotal evidence, but that's a very different kind of answer than the questioner talking about thanatosis.
Sure. And it sounds a lot like what we were just speaking of with these hardwired instincts.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, we have our last question from Instagram. So from Jose on Instagram, he asks, can evolution explain the origins of human morality and ethics?
Well, sort of in a way. I mean, there are, I think, an awful lot built onto it with culture, because I believe that human morality and ethics changes over a time scale which is much too fast to be biological evolution. It's got to be cultural. It's not that long ago that people would enjoy watching a public execution as a spectacle, as entertainment, and like going to the cinema. And it's not that long ago that they would be entertained by watching people being thrown to the lions in the Colosseum in Rome. So to a large extent, I think our ethics moves on and changes as the centuries, even as the decades go by, actually. But there probably is a bedrock of it coming from evolution. Reciprocation, the feeling of obligation to somebody who's done you a good turn, that you must do a good turn back, is something that is built into a large number of species. It's very common, and we understand how it evolves as an instinct. And that could form the basis for a kind of morality. What it could morph into the golden rule. How would you like it if somebody did that to you? So why do it to them, kind of thing. So my answer to the question is that there's a bedrock of morality coming from evolution, but a great big superstructure that is built in by culture, evolving by non-genetic means.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I really enjoyed today's Q&A session.
So did I. Yes.
Before we go, I know you just came off of your very long, very adventurous world tour. I hope that you've had time to recover. Is there anything that your audiences should be looking out for, or any events that you'll be doing anytime soon that people can pay a visit to you?
Oh, well, I'm going to TED in Vancouver in April to have a conversation with John McWhorter, the linguist and columnist on the New York Times as well. And we're going to talk about language and the resemblances between human language and the evolution of language and the evolution of animals, of living things. Otherwise, I've got... and also there's a commemoration of the Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee, which is in June, it's the 100th anniversary of that celebrated or infamous occasion in Tennessee. And we're going to visit the actual place, Dayton, Tennessee, where it happened, and have a little meeting there to commemorate the event.
That's great. Do you know if that event is open to the public?
Yes, I think it is. And it's organized through the Center for Inquiry and the Freedom from Religion Foundation jointly.
Okay, great. Well, we'll try to include some links to that in the description box of this video. And in the meantime, all of you who are watching, please make sure to keep your questions coming across social media, whether that's YouTube, Instagram, X, Facebook. And we look forward to another Q&A in the future. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you very much.